Today, there will be no box moving. Today is all about relaxation and maybe making my arms hurt a little bit less. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. I'll make some room here on the couch for you. You sit by the fire while I tell you some great stories brought to us by some great writers. Starting us off right, we have a tale from Serventus 6785 about something strange that lives in the basement. I'm a little surprised that I'm writing this, since I was never that much into the supernatural. I say not that much because my older sister, Rita, was mesmerized by it. She was 6 years older than me. So most of what she did with her friends in the attic of our garage was a mystery. The garage attic was strictly off limits. They guarded it like an inner sanctum. It wasn't until my mother discovered the Ouija board that I began to understand that something was amiss. We weren't particularly religious, but we did attend church on holidays. My mother went on a tirade when my father got home from work, insisting that my sister was inviting evil spirits into our house. My dad threw out the Ouija board, and later, I picked it up out of the trash and used it for target practice with my brother's BB gun. None of that would have been particularly memorable, except the following night, my sister was babysitting me. Normally, as soon as my parents left, they would call Brenda down the street to come down and split the babysitting money with her and leave. I didn't complain since Brenda was much more interested in my stories than my sister and her friends, but tonight, my sister stayed home and invited her friend Angie over. They told me to stay in my parents' room as they disappeared into the basement. I grew up in the Midwest, and we had one of those old, deep basements. The house was over 100 years old, and the basement was a place that I can only remember visiting maybe once or twice when I dropped some toys into the heating vent, and my dad had to go into the basement and disconnect some ductwork. There were only 2 small windows that were barely large enough for a child to fit through, but way too small for an adult. I remember there was a cold draft, too. There was a brick wall that butted up to the stairs, leading down to the basement that had partially collapsed. I remember looking into that darkness and asking my dad where it led, and he said it led beneath the house. My parents never had to tell me not to go into the basement. I was petrified of it. I think I was playing with toy soldiers in my parents' room when I heard their blood-curdling screams. I don't remember being afraid, but they both came running up the basement stairs and ran straight past me out of the house, slamming the basement door behind them. I was 7 years old at the time. I had no idea why I didn't follow them. I just sat there on the floor with my toy soldiers. And then I heard the footsteps. I thought maybe it was one of my older brothers, Joey, who was down the street playing guitar with his friend Steven. They were always playing pranks. The door to the basement was locked. I could hear the door being pushed. The lock was just a wooden disc my dad had made. When they slammed the door, it had fallen down and locked. I heard it hit the floor when the door burst open. And that's about all I remember. I woke up the next day in the hospital. Later I was told that my sister had run down the street to get my brother, and they said they'd found me unconscious on the floor. The doctor said I'd had a convulsion. That's what I believed for 13 years, at least until last night. My sister Rita went on to become a flight attendant, and my brother Joey, I still call him that, became a DNR officer. We love each other dearly, but because I live on the other side of the country, we don't stay in touch as much as we used to. At least we don't as often as when I was living in Michigan. I'd flown back from my father's funeral, and we were all reminiscing on my parents' porch. That's when my brother Joey brought up the night that I'd had the convulsion. He made us swear to never tell you the truth, Joey said, taking a long drag off his cigarette. But now that he's gone, I guess we can tell you what really happened. I looked over at Rita, thinking this might be a joke, but the look of dread on her face told me that whatever Joey was about to say was not for my amusement. "You sure this is a good idea?" she said nervously. Joey crushed his cigarette out on the wooden bench. "You didn't have a convulsion." Joey leaned in, the flicker of the porch light casting shadows across his face, making him look more solemn than usual. "What happened to you that night wasn't anything medical." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to tell me what had happened. "When Rita and I got back to the house, we found something with you." Joey glanced at Rita, and as if on cue, she said, It wasn't human." My mind went to the rational explanation of a rabid dog or maybe a feral raccoon. They both laughed when I asked if it was an animal. "So what was it?" I said. "It was like a shadow, and it was floating above you," Rita said, her voice barely audible. I laughed and got up to go back inside. "I don't believe in ghosts," I said. "Wasn't no fucking ghost," Joey said, unbuttoning his shirt and showing me a scar on his chest. "You got that when you fell out of a tree," I replied. "I remember you telling me." "No, it's a story we made up. You did that to me," he said, tapping out another cigarette. Nothing in their demeanors suggested this was a prank, but perhaps I'd underestimated their acting skills. "I was 7 years old. There's no way It went inside you," Joey said. He looked over at Rita, who finished his sentence. "It possessed you. I know that sounds horrible, but it wasn't your fault." "This had better be a hidden camera prank," I said, looking around. "You picked me up in the air like I was a twig and threw me across the room. Then you started speaking in some crazy language," Joey said. "It was my fault," Rita said, her eyes full of tears. "Me and Angie asked the spirits to reveal themselves." None of this sparked any memories. "How do you know you weren't imagining things?" Joey laughed and looked down at his scar as he rebuttoned his shirt. "I had trouble sleeping with you in my room for a year after that. You have any idea what it was like keeping that secret?" A part of me wondered why they'd decided to break the news to me now. I looked over at Rita, hoping she would start laughing, but she was crying instead. "Okay, so you two, saved me from an evil spirit?" I asked sarcastically. Joey shook his head. "Nah, Mom and Dad came home." My father was not a man prone to superstitions, so I was surprised when Joey decided to bring him into the story. "And when he walked in, you started talking that crazy language, and then you started slinging Dad around the room like a wet noodle," he said, lighting a second cigarette. Joey laughed at the thought. "I thought you were going to kill him, and that's when Mr. Payne walked in." I remembered Mr. Payne well. He always walked with a limp and was gardening in his backyard. We used to think it was funny that anyone had the last name Payne and that it would be perfect for a dentist, but he was a foreman at a factory. He heard the screams from across the street and came over to see what was wrong. "Boy, did he ever get a surprise," Joey said. "He was a good man," Rita said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "That thing started talking to him, and Mr. Payne started talking back in the same strange language." Joey was looking off in the distance. "There's a lot you don't know about Mr. Payne." I couldn't help but think my siblings had watched The Exorcist one too many times. "This is all unbelievable. I'm sorry. Did you know he studied to be a priest for 5 years and then gave it up when he met Mrs. Payne?" Joey said, sitting on the porch rail. "That's how he could speak to it. He studied those old languages. He started praying over you, and he asked Mom and Dad to get a priest," Rita added. "I tried to envision Mr. Payne standing over me in prayer, but I couldn't hold the thought. All sounded so fantastical. There was a whole room full of them praying over you, all night long," Joey said. "Every once in a while we'd hear a ruckus, and Mr. Payne and it would start talking to each other again." "I'm so sorry," Rita said, reaching out to grab my hand. "I've been wanting to tell you, God, for so long." It was strange, hearing a story about myself that sounded like a fairy tale. I knew the only way to find out if it was true was to ask Mr. Payne myself, but I wasn't even sure he was still alive. "Is Mr. Payne still alive?" I asked. "Yeah," Joey said. "He's over at the old folks' home. I saw him there when I went to Dad's birthday party a couple of years ago." I told my brother and sister that it was hard to believe, but if it did happen, I had no memory of it and forgave them for whatever it was worth. It seemed like it was important for them to hear that I forgave them, but it didn't sound like they'd done anything wrong. What I didn't tell them was that I planned to visit Mr. Payne tomorrow before my flight for California. I had a few hours in the morning, and given the circumstances, it seemed like the most rational thing to do. In retrospect, it was obviously not the wisest choice. That night, I sat in my hotel room trying to figure out why my siblings had come up with such a ridiculous story. They were both teenagers, and maybe they had misunderstood the situation. I might have lost my mind temporarily and then had a convulsion. Except the people praying over me all night long didn't seem to fit the story. But it was a small town with plenty of superstitious people. Wouldn't be the first time a group of well-meaning religious folks misdiagnosed a medical condition for a supernatural event. I woke up early the next morning and headed over to the nursing home. The last time I'd been to Hazelbuck Nursing Home was during my childhood. I would visit with my mom when my cousin was living there. My cousin had multiple sclerosis, and I remembered the place smelling bad, like Clorox. My cousin was always in good spirits and smiling, but I could never get over the smell of the place. To my surprise, the place had been completely renovated, and it even smelled better. There was a young lady in the front who greeted me. I asked if Mr. Payne was still a resident, and she asked me to sign in and pointed me towards room 144. I stood outside the room for a few moments. I still had time to turn around and head back to my normal, boring life in California. The radio was on, and I could hear Ernie Harwell doing a play-by-play announcement for the Tigers baseball game. Against my better judgment, I knocked on the door and heard a gruff voice say, "Door's open. Come in." I walked in and saw Mr. Payne sitting in a recliner. He didn't look much different than I remembered him, but I could tell he was having trouble placing me. "It's Rich Thelen. You knew me as Richie," I said, smiling. Mr. Payne's demeanor changed immediately. It was as if he'd seen a ghost. I can come back another time if you..." No, it's fine. I just wasn't expecting to see anyone today." He pushed out a footrest. "Have a seat." I was suddenly uncomfortable. I guess I had half expected Mr. Payne to tell me it was just an overactive imagination, but judging from his reaction, I knew I wasn't going to like what he had to tell me. I thought about standing up and leaving. I'm sure he'd probably wonder why I showed up, but there was some doors that were just best to leave closed. This felt like one of those. "I heard about your dad. You just never know how long you got until the bell tolls." It took me a moment to reorient myself. I'd completely forgotten that I'd been at my dad's funeral yesterday. Yeah, he always said he'd probably die of a heart attack. My grandpa was 45 when he died the same way. "You mean Bill? I knew your grandpa. We used to hunt pheasant together." I didn't remember my grandpa. He died before I was born, so I didn't have anything to add. "I'm really surprised to see you," Mr. Payne said, slapping me on the knee. "You look good." "Thank you," I said, realizing I could just make small talk and leave. I didn't need to open any locked doors. I could just shoot the breeze. "So what brings you here?" Mr. Payne asked. "I came because I heard a crazy story, and I wanted to see if it was true." Mr. Payne ran his fingers through what was left of his gray hair. "I figured that's why you were here." Mr. Payne looked over his shoulder. "Can you get me some water? There's a cup next to the sink." I didn't know if that was a stall tactic or if he was preparing to give me a long speech, but I was happy to stand up and create some space between us. A few minutes later, I turned around with his water, and that's when I noticed he was holding a rosary. I handed him the water, and rather than sit back down, I took a couple of steps and leaned against the counter. "I've tried to forget that night," Mr. Payne said, sipping from the styrofoam cup. "You sure this Wasn't just an overactive imagination? I asked. The old man lifted an eyebrow. Did they tell you what happened? What they could remember, yeah. Mr. Payne took a few more sips of water and thought for a long time. Well, they were just kids, so they probably didn't tell you everything. I waited for him to say something, but he just sat there in silence. I don't think he really wanted to discuss it. Mr. Payne, my brother said you dropped out of the priesthood. I did. Mrs. Payne was a nun back then, and I was going to be a priest, but nature decided otherwise. I laughed, even though it wasn't funny. Again, I contemplated abruptly walking out of the room. What you had in you was an old spirit, very old. It had come across the ocean from the old world, Europe. The language it spoke was Latin. None of this made any sense. Our house was old by the standards of the United States, but there was nothing ancient about it by European standards. Why would an old spirit live in our basement? I asked. Mr. Payne laughed. Is that what they told you, that it was in your basement? I nodded, surprised that there appeared to be a disagreement in their memories. Part of me hoped that the version I was about to hear was tethered in reality. It visited your basement because your sister and her friends called out to it, Mr. Payne said, his hand holding the rosary as it started to shake. I thought back to my brother telling me there was a lot of things I didn't know about Mr. Payne. That was suddenly starting to sound like an understatement. Then where did it come from? I asked. Mr. Payne's gaze went blank, and he started to mumble in a foreign language. That's when his eyes rolled back in his head, and a smile crossed his face. The following words rolled out of his mouth in a thick Italian accent. Venit ex me. A moment later, his whole body began to shake. I pushed the nurse button next to the bed, still grounded in reality. I thought he was having a stroke. He was talking much clearer now, and I tried to remember it. Sponsium cum santa fide. And then I saw it with my own eyes. Black smoke, like tentacles, lifted out of his body and started taking the shape of a human. I was no longer in the nursing home. I was a petrified 7-year-old boy on the floor holding a toy soldier. Everything I had repressed came back in a terrifying moment. The cries, the prayers, and eventually being freed. With the last of his strength, Mr. Payne whispered, Serveti ipsum, serveti ipsum. And a moment later, the shadows enveloped him and vanished. A caregiver eventually arrived a few minutes later. They said he was having one of his episodes and asked if I'd come back another day. I walked out of the nursing home and realized I'd reopened a door that Mr. Payne had locked with great difficulty and sacrificed 30 years ago. I didn't know the specifics of what Mr. Payne had done that night or what had happened in Rome that caused Mr. Payne to leave the priesthood, but something told me it was more than simply meeting his wife. A few months later, I looked up the meaning of those words. Mr. Payne was telling me he'd made a pact with the darkness, and then he told me to save myself. I pray every day to be spared the fate that Mr. Payne had. I also pray for his soul to be released. And perhaps, most importantly, I make sure I keep the basement door well locked. After a long week of moving stuff, sometimes it's just nice to sit by the fire and soak up a little heat. Everything seems to hurt, but pretty soon it'll all be worth it when we've got the brand new recording studio and all that good stuff that is really just gonna make the channel really come to life. But you're not here to hear about me brag. You're here to hear some spooky stories. So let's keep that train rolling. Brought to us by SpOoKyCaT, we've got a story about eating, which I guess can be scary sometimes, depending on what it is you're eating, or what's eating you, I suppose. So let's hear a story that lets us know what we've been eating. My grandma's dying. We sat outside her room, and my mom was crying into her hands. Dad was absently rubbing her back and staring off into the distance. Her room sits at the end of our house. My mom pulled out chairs from the dining table and placed them all along the walls of the hallway to simulate a morbid scene. Grandma didn't want to be taken to the hospital, so Mom brought the hospital to her. Grandma called out, and Mom jumped up, quickly entering the room. She came out seconds later with a perturbed expression on her face. "She's asked for you, Millie." My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't do well with death, especially when it was my grandma. I was close to her, a lot closer to her than my parents even. I stood and entered her room. It was dark in there and just smelled sickly. Her heavily draped room suddenly felt claustrophobic and stifling. She demanded that we leave her salmon pink curtains tightly closed, so only a thin sliver of light leaked into her previously vibrant room. "Millie," Grandma's weak voice beckoned me from the mound of blankets on her double bed. I hesitantly paused before walking closer and catching her free hand. Her hand was as light as bird bones. "Yeah, Grandma?" I lowered my voice. My normal voice would seem too loud in this room. "I want to absolve myself," Grandma whispered, her hand squeezing mine lightly. You don't have to, Grandma. You are a saint," I smiled at her, but I knew it was a grimace. "Need to absolve myself of my sins and my family's," Grandma continued as if I'd never spoken. "It was a different time when we were growing up. We struggled a lot. We lived on a farm. My daddy was a struggling man. My mama just decided that us girls needed to mind our business. Anyway, there was a particularly bad year that rolled into 2 more years. My daddy came home one day with a butcher paper, and he couldn't look us in the eye. We never questioned it, since Daddy was the man of the household. One day, I got curious. I followed him when he went to go and pick up the meat for the house, and..." Grandma pulled her hand out of my grasp and looked away from me. I pulled her hand back, my pulse kicking in. "Grandma," I asked quietly, I don't know what I'm asking. Are you okay? What did Great-Grandpa do?" "Millie, it was human. It was human meat. He saw me, and he got so unfathomably angry. But I left. I left before he could whoop me into next week. I ran home, and my mama yelled at me for hours about shirking my duties and my chores. Daddy came home with a different colored butcher paper full of meat, and he eyed me silently. I ate it without any complaints, but I could taste that it was different. The other stuff was richer and tasted different." I wanted to recoil, to run away from my grandma, close my eyes against the depravity I'd just heard. But the way she was describing the taste, it made me think of Mom's special supper. She made it ever so often, and she made a huge deal out of it. I wasn't allowed to go out to my friend's place or invite anybody over. I gulped, and Grandma saw it. Her face changed, and she started to wail. I ripped my hand out of her grasp, and Mom immediately opened the door, as if she was standing there. "Millie," she scolded loudly, "you upset her." I blushed darkly and ran from the room, tears and shame bubbling on the surface. Dad tried to stop me, but I shrugged him off and ran to my room. I decided to become a vegan. I think I'll end the post here. Don't judge me too much. May 19th. I told my mom the next day, and she eyed me silently. "No meat?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, maybe not a vegan, but a vegetarian. Still, yeah, no meat. I smiled nervously at my mom's expression. Interesting. So, you won't be joining us for my special supper in about... She paused and quickly glanced down the hall and back again, as if it was a subconscious action. A day or two? I swallowed against the rising nausea crawling up my throat and grinned. Yeah, sorry, Mom. She nodded stiffly and continued to wash dishes. I stepped out of the kitchen and made my way down the hall before my dad stopped me. She shouldn't have any visitors, Millie, Dad said gruffly. My heart pounded and my hands shook. I began to wonder if Grandma really had a say in going to the hospital or not. My grandma died 2 days ago. Now we're at the dinner table with plates of food placed in front of us. Mom and Dad had seasoned meat and mashed potatoes and some caramelized carrots. I had a plate full of carrots and mashed potatoes and tried not to look at their food with any type of longing. Not that I'm trying to eat anyone, but my sudden choice of vegetarianism is really out of survival. My mom stared at me as she took her first bite, and the lump of mashed potatoes I ate suddenly turned into a ball in my stomach. I glanced away from her and stared at my plate. My mom started tapping her steak knife against her plate. You sure you want to stay a vegetarian, Mill? I acknowledged, looking up at her. Dad was silently eating too, but his eyes were trained on his plate. Okay, but I went through all this trouble, Mom said, shrugging offhandedly. I see that. It's just I've been thinking about this for a while, and with Grandma dying, I thought a change of lifestyle would be good for me, I said, suddenly now wanting to cry. Grandma did what she had to do to survive, but Mom and Dad are well off. I don't know why she started doing this, or Dad, for that matter. I swallowed loudly and quickly grabbed my water, half chugging it. My mouth was so dry. Can I be excused? I'm not feeling well, I said, my eyes skipping over their plates. Leave your plate, I'll clean it up, Mom said dismissively, an angry expression on her face. She still hadn't stopped tapping her knife against the plate. The haunting tapping followed me all the way to my room. I rolled myself onto my bed and fell into a fitful sleep. Something woke me up. I quickly hopped onto my phone and tapped schedule post for 20 minutes from now. I was going to post this earlier, but I was just writing it down to, I don't know, wrap my head around things. I guess the title of this should have been, Who Have We Been Eating? I know that posting this will make me seem like a monster, and you'll think of my family as monsters who eat other people. In my defense, I didn't know. My mom and dad, though, go ahead and think about them what you will, but please, don't think my grandma is... I think that's my door. It's always nice to check into what you're eating a little better. Good thing I don't have to worry about anything in this bag of popcorn here. Or maybe I do. I'd rather not think about it. Coming up next from Leoofalexandria, we have a story about, about moving to a new place. That's certainly been my horror lately. So, let's see how good a welcome we receive when we're welcomed to the valley. The last thought I had before drifting to sleep was how excited I was to finally be going on a proper road trip. I've driven for a few hours here and there for vacation. I've even taken a decent 10-plus hour trip, but never truly had a road trip. Me and my wife are driving from the Midwest, all the way to sunny California. I've spent some time there in my youth and always wanted to go back. Enjoy the beauty and the weirdness of the Venice Beach, eat a Dodger dog at Chavez Ravine, take a normie Hollywood Stars double-decker bus tour across Beverly Hills. We're going to travel to NorCal, too. See the Golden Gate, see that crooked road, and of course see the house where the Tanners lived. Rest in peace, Danny Tanner. No Rain by the Blind Melons started playing on one of those serious 90s channels. Oh, wow, I love this song, my wife blurted out. I, of course, knew that already. And we caught it when it started, she said. This again, I also knew. She's not superstitious at all, the least superstitious person I've ever known. But she has this one thing. If no rain comes on when she's flipping channels, or in the middle of a TV commercial or something, she cannot listen to it. It must start at the beginning where it's bad luck. Hey, we all have our thing, right? Seeing how happy she was, I drifted off. Enjoy your prize, hun. I'm gonna nod off for a few. She barely acknowledged me, which was fine. I was happy she was happy. My eyelids stayed closed, like a curtain after a successful Broadway show. When I awoke several hours later, I wiped the sleep from my eyes. I always pictured that childlike way of making little fists and rubbing my eyes, but I did it the adult way, just full-on rubbing my face with my open palms. I thought I had been out for about an hour. It was nearing dusk when I drifted off. I knew we were in the area of Missouri or Kansas, boring flat land. The pinkish-red sky was calming, soothing somehow. But when I woke up, the sky was cloudless and bright blue, a blue I'd never seen before. I didn't feel like I'd slept through the night. Groggily, I took in my surroundings. Still driving, the wife was at the wheel. "Oh my goodness, I adore this song," she said. Blind Melon was on the radio. I know," I stated. "How did this song start again? Did I just happen to wake up when this song randomly started playing again, hours later?" A tiny, uncomfortable pit the size of a walnut appeared in my stomach, just behind my belly button. Things were about to become serious. "What time is it?" I asked. She slid eyes to me, not wanting to take her focus off the road. "It's 7 o'clock, hon. You were only out for a few minutes." Confused, but chalking it up to that confusion of the heavy power nap, I looked out my window at the endless plains. I saw mountains, though. Mountains made of metal. No, that can't be right. I can only describe them as shiny metallic. What year is it? She furrowed her brow and snorted. "It's 2025, babe. Same year it was when we started this trip about a dozen hours ago." Now I was rigid. That's not right. We started the trip 3 years before, in the current year of 2022. I decided not to say anything. I didn't know what to say. That little walnut pit in my stomach grew to a watermelon. She gave me a playful push on the shoulder and continued to sing Blind Melon. She then looked over at me, giving me a little smile with her tongue out. She'd done this particular gesture thousands of times during our relationship. Her eyes were piercing blue. The problem was, her eyes are hazel. They were always hazel. Or were hazel, I suppose. "What happened to your eyes? Are you okay? Do you need me to drive?" I must have had a panicked expression that I did not intend to portray. She looked instantly worried. "I'm fine, hon. Are you okay? Maybe you had too many Slim Jims or something." She laughed. As she finished singing the song, the DJ came on. That was 1979's #1 hit, "No Rain" by Blind Melon. What a voice of a generation. Shannon Hoon, still kicking after all these years. We have an exclusive interview with the man who produced so many hits and famously joined the Beatles a few years later, replacing John Lennon, who left for, well, we all know the reason. Stay tuned, folks. In the meantime, enjoy the brand new Weezer hit. I think the band is going to be huge. What the hell was this? Shannon Hoon died of an overdose in '95, and he certainly never joined the most famous band in the world. "We're at our first stop," my wife said, breaking me from the mental panic. Our Jeep rumbled to a stop. I saw the black motel in front of me. "What is this?" I said. "It's where we're going to sleep for the first night on our road trip, silly. Don't pretend you're not excited to finally stay here." I pretended to know what the hell she was talking about, and said something to affirm that. This place was horrendous. It was foreboding and smelled like bad cheese. I took our bags out, all the while keeping focus on the front of this castle. It reminded me of Skeletor's fortress from He-Man. The inside was surprisingly nice. Looked like any Holiday Inn across the United States. After a few drinks that we brought from 2022, I hope, we did some married things, and then decided to order takeout and see what was on the hotel TV. She said she was pretty beat after driving all day and wanted to take a quick nap. I thought that was a great idea. That will give me some time to go online and see where the hell I was or what time I was in. I stood at the elevator, pushing the down button. What looked like a father and a daughter trotted from one of the hallways, stopping near me. I turned to acknowledge them with a polite smile and a head nod. Upset, doesn't really begin to describe how I felt when I looked at them. They looked like humans, but just off a bit. The eyes were too wide, the nose was too small, the ears were almost non-existent. When the elevator opened, they entered, and I froze. The father held his arm out in front of the door to save it for me. I fished for my phone and pretended to take a call. I politely gave him that, "Thanks, but I have to go. Over here, look." He shrugged and let the door close. At that moment, I noticed my heart was pumping through my chest. It was only then that that same heart almost broke through my ribcage. I noticed the phone I had in my hand was a 2000s era flip phone, not even a razor. I looked at it like it was a medieval device. I slowly pulled the antenna out, and I opened it and closed it. I studied the drab gray. I stared at the abysmal display screen. What year was it? I burst through the stairwell and made my way down to the lobby. Our floor was only on the second floor, so I wasn't totally out of breath. But I did, however, throw up when I got outside. The only time, mind you, that I'd thrown up without being drunk or actually sick. Luckily, I've never been a puker. I slowly and cautiously entered our room, with a key card, just like 2022. My wife was thankfully asleep. I needed to go sit down. I was nauseous, and my stomach felt like two grizzly bears were trying to tear it apart from opposite sides. I decided to step back outside, just to make sure my wife got complete silence for a bit longer. I slumped down in the hallway outside our door. Let's go over what happened. I took a road trip nap. When I woke up, 3 years had passed. Little things have changed, but they were huge. The blind melon thing, the people I saw whose faces were just slightly off. I had a mother-freaking flip phone, and, again, not even a razor. As that thought left me, my pocket buzzed. Stupid phone. I flipped it open, again feeling a little cool, I had to admit. It was satisfying to gracefully flip open the first cell phone to take a phone call. Even better was slamming them shut after a phone call. You can't hang up the phone like you used to. It turned out it was a text message. I read it slowly. The blocky characters were from the other time. Figuratively and quite literally. Don't go back to the room. I can't see how that's a good thing. This isn't even my phone. This isn't my time. What is all this? I froze for what seemed like a lifetime. I had a single thought. Text back. So I did. I struggled with the old way for a moment, forgetting how to use the text buttons. Ah yes, the world where keyboards were not shrunk down to a 4-inch dimension. If you wanted to text the letter S in any word, you had to hit the number 7 like 24 times. It made it simple, as my mind was already melting down the back of my spine. Who is this? I pecked. Your wife. We won't make. My skin went cold. I think it turned blue. Won't make what? I keyed the door open again, stumbling into the main room. She was gone. The bed was made, this time with a yellow comforter, set to look right out of the Brady Bunch. Okay, now it's panic time. I texted back furiously. I called, which didn't work at all. Didn't even get a busy signal or a dial tone. Getting seriously worried and hyperventilating, I dropped my phone. When I went to pick it up, I heard a voice. Hey kid, you okay? Kid. When I finally grabbed my phone, I pulled my arm back like I just stuck it in a campfire. My arm was small, like a child's. At that moment, I looked up at the voice I heard. I looked up. I wasn't an adult. The old woman that asked me was towering over me. Feeling sick again, I stumbled backwards, tripping over my feet over and over again. It was like that meme from the internet, when the internet was around, where people just kept falling down the escalator. When I finally gained my footing, I slammed into a newspaper machine. I don't know what else to call it. You used to put quarters in, and you would pull a newspaper thing out that told you the day's date and the news from last night. The Uncanny Valley Times, May of no year. The slogan, bringing you the most trusted news, just a bit off. What could that mean? Buzz. Whew. Gonna put my feet up for this next one. It's a longie, and it's one you might better settle in for. Coming to us from NotJustSomeNumbers, we learn the downside of ignoring things, especially while we're out and about, out in the woods, out and vulnerable. So, let's hear about some warning signs they ignored while camping, and paid the price. There's nothing to do in my town. If the internet had never been invented, I would have gotten stuck hanging out at the local coffee shop, desperate to fill my time. I have access to unlimited entertainment and information at my fingertips, and yet I still can't find answers about what happened last summer. I'm more of an indoor person. Somehow, my friend Kenny dragged me along on a camping trip with his brother and his childhood friend. We all grew up together. Kenny's brother was 2 years older, so it felt like we never really connected. I didn't dislike him, we just never had anything in common. My best friend was the prettiest girl in the county, and I think she knew it. I had been in love with her since I was 13, but I'd never admitted it to her. I know the moment I did, our relationship would change. I was scared she might reject my feelings or accept them. Just being friends suited me just fine. The only way to get me outside was if Mia was going to be there. I think Kenny and Darren knew that. If I refused to go on the camping trip, they asked Mia to come along, and they told me she would be with us. I hated how easily they played me. It was a hot day. All of us were sweating by the time we arrived at the campsite. "Can we set up the tent after?" Kenny said, as he let the bags drop from his shoulders. "No, let's get it done now, or else we won't get it done in time," I told him, no matter how much I wanted to put it off. I knew him. The last trip he and his brother took, they were too lazy to set up the tent and just slept outside in their sleeping bags. They came back home covered in bug bites. I didn't want a repeat of that. They both groaned, but they listened to me. Mia and I worked on one tent while the brothers set up the other. "There are only 2 tents, I pointed out. "We've shared tents before," she replied, not looking up. If she had, she would have seen how red my face had got. At least, I could blame the sunny weather for my flushed cheeks. Kenny decided to toss a full water bottle at Darren, but missed. It hit me upside the back of the head, and I needed to go over then and roughhouse for a little bit. Mia crossed her arms, amused by us. I got my butt handed to me, like always. As I got back up off the ground from the play fight, I noticed something white flash between the trees. I was about to mention it, but the color was gone as fast as I noticed it. We had picked a campsite that wasn't that popular with the locals, but that didn't mean there wasn't anyone else in the woods. We finally got the campsite set up, tents ready, food put away in case any animals, and the firewood gathered. Once that was all set, we started to head down the path that led to the lake. We all had earned a long swim. Kenny and Darren walked ahead of us, and I helped Mia down the rough pathway. "Should we really be camping right now?" Mia asked, loud enough for Kenny to hear. "Wasn't there a big search recently?" I'd heard a little about that. Kenny chimed in to explain what had happened. 4 campers high on shrooms walked into the woods, and no one found any trace of them. That was 3 weeks ago, so I don't think we'll come across any feral lost campers, he said with a shrug. It was a bit heartless to imply those 4 were dead, but he was right. Those 4 didn't have a good chance of being around after dealing with that summer's heat for 3 weeks. "Just in case, let's not go out in the woods alone," I told him, suddenly feeling a chill, even though I was sweating. "Is that your fetish? You like to watch us pee?" Kenny teased. "I think it's number 2s. No free shows," Darren added. "Kinda weird how fast you guys thought of that. Almost like it was on your mind," I replied. I've dealt with these guys for years. I expected the dumbest thing to come out of their mouths. Mia giggled at us, and I wondered why she put up with these morons. The lake wasn't as cold as I had hoped. The water was nice, and it did help with the heat, but I almost wished I was at home with the AC on full blast. When I saw Mia in her black one-piece swimsuit and trunks, the thought of AC went out of my mind. I kept forcing my eyes away from her, so she didn't know how much of a creep I was. I really needed to get a grip on myself, though. "Hey, do you see that?" I asked Kenny when he swam over to me. He wrapped an arm around my neck and playfully drugged me under, but stopped when I spoke up. He followed my line of sight into the woods, trying to spot what I was staring at. "Is that a person?" he asked, squinting. Soon Darren and Mia were looking in the same direction. A white shape was between 2 trees on the other side of the lake. It didn't look like a person, but it was impossible to tell at that distance. It was too still to be a person, yet it didn't sway in the breeze as if it was a discarded shirt or some trash. "Let's go see," Kenny said as he let go of my neck. He started to swim away, and Mia came up next to me. "What do you think it is?" she asked. When I'd taken my eyes off the tree and to her, the white object moved. Kenny stopped swimming when he realized what he'd been looking at was gone. "Probably some old pervert watching a tasty little thing swim around shirtless," Kenny said with a splash. "He's implying the old pervert is watching you," Derek finished with a smile. I slapped water in his face. Soon the white shape had been forgotten as we got into a water fight. I kept glancing back into the trees. The white shape didn't return, and I assumed it had been nothing after all. We started heading back to the campsite when the sky started to turn orange. Kenny and Darren chatted the entire way back about the beans they were going to cook and eat. I was glad I was not sharing a tent with them tonight. When we did get back, they discovered that somehow they left the bag that held the coveted beans back in the truck. Mia had also forgot a few things, so she went back with them. I didn't feel like walking, so I volunteered to stay behind and get the fire started. They'd been gone about 5 minutes when I heard Kenny's voice again off in the distance. Oddly enough, it wasn't in the direction they left in. "You forget something?" I called out. His voice came again, but I couldn't make out the words. It was coming from the direction of the lake, but he would have needed to walk through the campsite to be on that path. I stood up, straining to listen, calling out his name as I took a few steps closer to the path heading to the lake. "Kenny, stop fooling around," I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. Did he take the long way around just to scare me? No, he hadn't been gone that long for him to be that far out. I took another step closer, but stopped. This felt wrong. After those 4 people got lost in the woods, I decided I didn't want to go down a path alone. I went back to setting up the fire and getting dinner ready. If Kenny was playing a prank, then he would get bored and come back. Oddly enough, my 3 friends came back together. "Did you see any other cars around?" I asked, wondering if they had just been another camper out there that sounded like Kenny. "No, it's just us. Why?" Mia asked, catching on that something was bothering me. "I heard something while you guys were out. It sounded like a human, but it's hard to say." Now I was doubting myself, but that really sounded like a voice. Or was it just too far away to tell? "Probably a bird. Some of those loons or whatever they're called sound spooky," Darren said with a shrug. He went out camping here pretty often. I accepted that he knew what he was talking about and dismissed my concern. We settled down to eat. The brothers gladly ate cans of beans as Mia and I stuck to our hot dogs. The brothers also lit up an after-dinner treat. I didn't smoke, but Mia did on occasions. She passed that night. I think she didn't want to bring the smell into the shared tent. Kenny stood up to say he needed to use the washroom. It had gotten dark, so I found him a flashlight. I also needed to go. Then Darren stood up, deciding that he should go with us. And Mia didn't want to be left alone, so we all gathered for a bathroom break. It was a bit hard to focus on the task at hand, knowing Mia was so close by. I knew she had her back turned to the 3 of us as we took care of business, yet it still took me the longest to finish. We scouted a good spot for her and gave Mia some privacy, but also kept scanning the trees in case a wild animal decided to suddenly appear. With all that taken care of, we were going to head back when an unnatural sound came from nearby. Something I never expected to ever hear while in the forest at night. A few feet away from us came the sound of a baby crying. I saw Kenny's pale face in the light of my flashlight. Darren silently shook his head as Mia stood frozen in place. I took a step closer to the source of the noise, and Darren's hand fell on my shoulder. "To hell with that," he whispered. I agreed and took a step back. We should all just leave. Mia, bless her, didn't want to risk someone actually being in trouble. She bravely marched off into the woods with 3 guys going after her, whispering for us to get out of there. We followed the source of the sound. She stopped just outside a small clearing with someone sitting on a log. They were dressed in rags with their back facing us. The figure hunched over, rocking back and forth as they made shushing sounds. we didn't hear the baby crying anymore. This was freaky, downright nightmare fuel. "Are you okay?" Mia asked in a shaky voice. "My baby, my poor baby," the woman spoke, and she sounded so normal compared to how she looked. "We can call someone to get you some help," Mia offered. "My poor baby is starving." Slowly, the figure turned its head. The light caught a set of gray eyes that reflected in the flashlight. Stringy gray hair fell over her pale face. At first, the expression was blank. Then the face transformed into something distorted and monstrous. Kenny and Darren were screaming before the creature stood up. They bolted, leaving Mia and me behind. I grabbed her wrist, forcing her to run as the pale creature screeched. It got on all fours to easily cross the clearing to reach us. It jumped into the air, mouth open and bony, clawed hands outstretched. I pulled Mia out of the way just in time. The creature crashed into a tree, then flipped around on the ground like a cat trying to right itself. We started running again. Mia's legs shook so much I ended up grabbing her around the waist to just drag her along behind me. To my horror, the monster kept coming for us. I needed to fight back. I let go of her long enough to find a hefty stick to use as a weapon. That was a mistake, although I'm not sure if we had any chance of getting away unscathed. The pale creature came down on Mia, biting down on her hand. She screamed and kicked to get the thing away from her. I slammed the branch as hard as I could on the monster's face. It screeched and released my best friend. I kept hitting it, but I think I was just pissing it off. Just as it was about to go into a counterattack, a whistle came from somewhere. For some reason, the creature suddenly got on all fours, a look of distress on its face. It turned tail and darted back into the woods. To my horror, I saw another pale figure between the trees, also take off running on all fours. I didn't care about the reason why they were leaving, only that we were safe for now. "How bad is it?" I said to Mia, turning all my attention on her. She shook her head with tears in her eyes. The bite wasn't as deep as I had thought. We had a first aid kit at camp. I took hold of her again and got us moving. I didn't hear Kenny or Darren. Even though they left us behind, I hoped they were safe. "It'll be all right. We'll get out of here. Do you have your phone?" I asked as we kept moving. She shook her head. I hadn't grabbed mine either. Sure, we were smart enough to go in a group, but we hadn't done anything intelligent after that. An odd whistling sound came through the trees. The strange melody chilled me to the core. Mia started to tug at my arm as we walked away from the whistling. I glanced over her shoulder and saw flashes of white darting around the branches above us. As much as I hated the whistling, going in that direction seemed like the better option. Mia protested a little when I pulled on her arm to get moving. I didn't want to scare her by telling her that the creatures were stalking us in the trees. When I heard Kenny scream, I forgot about the threat we faced and ran in his direction. Hearing his voice was a good sign. I just hope we got to him in time. We stumbled into another clearing. I raised the flashlight I somehow still had. The beam of light landed on a stranger's face. His left eye reflected the light, but his right eye didn't. His head was slightly tilted, as if amused by my sudden appearance. My skin crawled, seeing such a pleased face after a terrifying encounter beforehand. Kenny was on the ground, breathing heavily, with the man's foot on his chest. He also had a bite taken out of his arm that was freely bleeding. For a moment, it appeared he had a crossbow bolt sticking out of his chest. I soon realized the bolt was stuck inside a pale monster beside him. I didn't see it first. The stranger had a hunter's bow attached to his arm, loaded and ready to shoot. "What did you do to Kenny, and where's Darren?" I demanded with a trembling voice. The man licked his lips and lifted his foot off of Kenny's chest. He brushed the strands of dirty brown hair from his face, only to have it fall back down. "I just saved this one from being a midnight snack, and I sent the other one down the trail. He might not reach the end alone, though." The the stranger said, ending his sentence with a raspy laugh. He sounded as if he smoked a pack a day for most of his life. I didn't trust the guy. Mia tightened her grip on my arm, showing she felt the same way. 2 of you got bitten tonight. Bites can turn people into those things. The infected ones won't be able to stand the whistling. After the man spoke, he started whistling in a way that didn't sound human. It was as if a songbird was trying to imitate a man-made instrument. I hadn't been bitten that night, yet the noise put me on edge. Kenny recovered enough to scramble away from the stranger. Mia didn't react, aside from appearing as nervous as she did when she first stumbled onto the scene. Finally, the man finished whistling and then studied us all very carefully. He raised the crossbow and rested it against his shoulder. The trail is just past those 2 trees. You kids better get going. A weight had been lifted off my chest. Aside from some minor injuries and a few scars, we were free to leave. Kenny was the first to get up. His legs shook as he tried to walk towards where we had been directed. Mia and I walked past the man, feeling his eyes on us. All the stress from the night came back as he gave us his unseen, judging stare. I thought we were in the clear when a sharp whistle came again. It was sudden, and I jumped. Mia did as well. I turned around to comfort her, and what I saw caused my entire world to come crumbling down. Her face changed. The person I'd cared for so deeply and for so long looked nothing like her. In her shock, she dropped her mask to let a contorted version of herself show through. When she realized her cover had been blown, her mouth grew wide and was suddenly filled with countless sharp teeth. She wanted to take my head off, but a quick shot from the crossbow stopped her. A bolt went through her cheek, shattering her teeth. She screamed, thrashing around, before the man shot her again. She ripped the bolt from her face and jumped backwards. Mia landed on all fours, snarling with a blood-filled mouth. To my horror, a ripping sound came as she sprouted massive bat wings. Her hands became claws, and her face transformed into something so far from human that I almost doubted she had once been the friend I cared for. In a flash, she launched herself into the treetops, joining the other white creatures that watched the scene at a distance. It took me a long time to realize the stranger started to drag me away. My brain was so numb from the shock, I didn't remember how long we walked on the trail or what anyone said to me most of the way back. I knew the man was whistling again, and I snapped, wanting the noise to end. He stopped for a few minutes, then I realized the noise was the only thing keeping the creatures away. He playfully started back up again as Kenny and I kept our heads forward, trying to ignore the horrors in the trees. Darren was waiting for us at the end of the trail at the outside of the woods. A lone police officer stood next to him, face as cold as steel. We stopped in front of them, unsure of what to say or how to explain ourselves. "Did you take care of the problem?" the officer said, sounding annoyed. "Problems? And nope, too many of them to deal with, and get these 3 out at the same time. I'm going back in to see what I can do. Sure do wish I had a friend come along with me," the stranger said, with a loud and exasperated sigh. I found my mouth opening to offer to go back and save Mia, but the cop stopped me. He saw 3 scared kids who would die if they tried to fight some monsters in the dark woods. "None of that. This is your job. Now go do it while I take care of my duties." The man shrugged again and pulled something out of his pocket. I expected it to be a pack of cigarettes, but he opened a small jar of dried cinnamon sticks. He tried to offer one to Kenny, who refused. I reached out and took one, not to start chewing on it like he did, but I needed something real from that night, or else my brain wouldn't believe it had happened. "This one's bit. Do you have anything for him?" the officer asked, and the stranger shook his head. Without warning, the cop pulled out a package of syringes with some sort of clear mystery fluid inside. Kenny didn't protest the shot. The officer then reached into his back pocket and pulled out 3 folded pieces of paper. "Sign these statements. The story is your friend got up in the middle of the night and got lost. We'll search for her tomorrow," the cop said, and handed us a sheet of paper. Darren looked disgusted, but he signed his name. Kenny needed some prodding to do the same. I refused, and it made the officer glower in my direction. "What if I tell a different story?" I threatened, ready to face whatever retaliation might happen. "You can. I say it would be better for you mentally to get the story out, but no one will believe you. As it is, people will assume you did something to that girl. Don't make it harder on yourself," the stranger said, as he rolled the cinnamon stick between his teeth. I hated him. I hated myself, and I hated what had happened. I signed the paper, and the officer told us to get in the car so he could take us to the station. He made us repeat the same fake story a few dozen times. As we drove off, I looked out the back window to see the stranger giving us a sarcastic wave, and I saw the lights of the car being reflected by so many eyes watching in the trees. There was a search for Mia, but nothing turned up. People have whispered about what happened. None of it's even close to the truth. Kenny and Darren started to stay inside and away from accusing stares. I've heard they're not as close as they were before. I've started saving up as much as I can to move away. There's nothing left for me in this place except bad memories. I don't know if that man hunted down all the monsters lurking in the woods, and deep down, I hope he didn't kill the thing that Mia turned into. Twisted or not, I wanted a part of her to live on, no matter how selfish that was. I need to leave this place. I found myself wanting to go back to those woods and try to find her, and that desire scares me. The real Mia would want me to live, and that's what I'm going to try to do. One more story for you, and it's another longie and a goodie. Brought to us by our dear friend, Society Menace. Let's hear a story about some international ghost hunters who bite off a little more than they can chew and discover a little more than I think even they were expecting to find. I've borne witness to horrors beyond mortal comprehension. My companions and I, seekers of truth hidden in the shadows, have traversed the globe in pursuit of spectral phenomenon. Yet nothing could have prepared us for the eldritch terrors that awaited us on the blood-soaked soil of a long-forgotten American battlefield. Our small band of ghost hunters consisted of 4 souls bound by an insatiable curiosity for the supernatural. There was myself, descended from a long line of Bavarian mystics, Hans Mueller, a skeptical physicist whose rational mind had been shaken by an encounter with a poltergeist in his youth, Greta Werber, an expert on occult history whose family had guarded arcane secrets for generations, and Klaus Bayer, a former priest whose crisis of faith had led him to seek answers in the realm of spirit. We had come to this desolate corner of Virginia at the behest of a local historian who had reported strange occurrences on the site of a Civil War skirmish. Locals spoke in hushed tones of unearthly sounds echoing across the mist-shrouded fields at night, of phantom soldiers seen marching in formation, of an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to seep into one's very bones. As our rented vehicle bounced along the rutted road leading to the site, I felt a growing sense of unease. The lush green countryside seemed to darken with every passing mile, the very air growing thick and oppressive. Hans even rationalized, attempting to lighten the mood with jokes about American ghost stories, but his laughter rang hollow in the unnatural stillness. We arrived at the designated coordinates just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields before us. An old, dilapidated farmhouse stood on the edge of the property, its windows dark and foreboding. As we unloaded our equipment, EMF meters, infrared cameras, other tools of the trade, I noticed that Greta had gone very pale. "There's something wrong here," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously across the landscape. "Can't you feel it? It's as if the very ground is hungry." Klaus laid a comforting hand on her shoulder, but I could see the concern etched on his weathered face. "We've faced dark forces before, mein Freund. Whatever lurks here, we shall face it together." As twilight deepened into true night, we began our investigation. Hans and Greta took readings near the old farmhouse, while Klaus and I ventured into the field proper. The tall grass whispered against our legs as we moved, and more than once I could have sworn I heard muffled sounds of gunfire. "It's just the wind," I muttered to myself, though the air was eerie still, or perhaps some local teens playing pranks. Klaus shook his head grimly. "This is no prank, Wilhelm. There's an awareness here. Can't you sense it? It's as if 1,000 eyes are watching our every move." I was about to respond when my foot struck something solid in the grass. Kneeling down, I brushed away the vegetation to reveal a rusted piece of metal. As I lifted it, my blood ran cold. It was a belt buckle, corroded by time, but still bearing the unmistakable insignia of a Confederate soldier. "Klaus," I called, my voice trembling, "I think we've found—" My words were cut short by a piercing scream from the direction of the farmhouse. We sprinted back, our hearts pounding, to find Hans supporting a shaking Greta, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. "The basement! I saw! God, I saw!" Before she could finish, a low, rumbling sound began to emanate from beneath our feet. The ground itself seemed to tremble, and a foul, rotten stench filled the air. From the shadowy doorway of the farmhouse, a sickly green light began to pulse, growing brighter with each passing second. "We need to leave," Hans said urgently, already beginning to guide Greta towards the vehicle. "Whatever this is, it's beyond our expertise. We need to call in reinforcements. Maybe even—" His words were drowned out by a deafening roar as the green light exploded outward, engulfing us all in a sticky glow. I felt a sensation of falling, being pulled downward by unseen hands, and then darkness, absolute and all-encompassing. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying face down in cold, damp earth. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid tang of gunpowder. Slowly, I raised my head, blinking to clear my vision. What I saw defied all rational explanation. Gone was the overgrown field and the dilapidated farmhouse. Instead, I found myself in the midst of a raging battle. Union and Confederate soldiers clashed all around me, their uniforms pristine, their faces set in grim determination. Yet, there was something profoundly wrong with the scene. The soldiers moved with an unnatural fluidity, their forms seeming to shimmer and distort at the edges. Their eyes, dear God, their eyes were empty, black voids that seemed to draw in all light. I scrambled to my feet, desperately searching for my companions. "Hans! Greta! Klaus!" I shouted, my voice lost in the cacophony of battle. Just as I turned, I realized with mounting horror that the fighting seemed to be focused on a central point, a swirling vortex of that same sickly green energy we had seen in the farmhouse. And at its edge stood a figure that I could only describe as an abomination. It towered over the phantom soldiers, its form a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes, constantly shifting and reforming. Where its head should have been, a pulsing orb of that verdant light throbbed in time with the vortex. As I watched, paralyzed with terror, I saw it reach out with its pseudopod and grasp one of the spectral combatants. The soldier's form seemed to dissolve, drawn into the creature as it let out a sound that was part scream and part laugh. "Wilhelm," A hand grasped my shoulder, and I whirled to find Klaus standing behind me, his face pale but determined. "We have to find the others and get out of here." I nodded numbly, allowing him to guide me through the chaos of the battlefield. The phantom soldiers paid us no heed, locked in their eternal struggle as we moved. I began to notice other anomalies, patches of the modern world bleeding through the Civil War tableau. Here, a cluster of our scientific instruments lay scattered in the mud. There, a piece of the old farmhouse wall stood incongruously amidst a grove of trees that looked centuries old. "What's happening?" I shouted to Klaus, as we ducked to avoid a volley of musket fire that passed harmlessly through our bodies. "Have we gone mad?" "I fear it's worse than that. I believe we've stumbled into a tear in the fabric of reality. This place, it's a nexus point where multiple timelines are converging. That thing at the center, it's feeding on chaos, growing stronger with each soul it consumes." Before I could process this terrifying information, we heard a familiar voice calling out, "Over here, quickly!" We turned to see Hans waving frantically from the shelter of a crumbling stone wall. As we approached, I saw Greta huddled beside him, her eyes wide and unfocused. "She's in shock," he explained, as we crouched beside him. "I found her wandering in a daze near that thing. Wilhelm, Klaus, what is happening? In God's name, what is going on?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat as I saw the expression of abject horror that dawned on Hans's face. Following his gaze, I turned to see the battlefield had fallen silent. The phantom soldiers stood motionless, their empty eyes all turned in our direction. Beyond them, towering and terrible, was the abomination. He began to move towards us. Each step it took seemed to distort the very air around us. Reality rippled and warped, images from different eras bleeding into one another. I saw glimpses of the field as it must have looked during the Civil War, flashes of the overgrown present that we had just encountered, and terrifying visions of a blasted, lifeless future. "We have to do something," Klaus said, his voice steady despite the fear that he must be feeling. "We can't let that thing break through to our world." Greta stirred then, her eyes focusing for the first time since we'd found her. "The vortex. It's a wound in time. If we can close it..." Hans shook his head. "With what? We're not equipped to deal with anything like this." As the others argued, I found my gaze drawn to the belt buckle I had discovered. It still lay clutched in my hand, forgotten in the chaos. As I stared at it, a wild, desperate idea began to form. "Our equipment," I said suddenly, cutting through the debate. "Hans, you said it was scattered across the battlefield, yes? If we can gather it, maybe we can use it to disrupt the energy field surrounding that thing." Klaus caught on immediately. "Yes, and if we can weaken it, perhaps we can push it through the vortex before it fully manifests in our reality." It was a long shot, but it was the only plan we had. As the abomination drew ever closer, we split up to gather what we could from our ghost hunting gear. I found myself sprinting across the nightmare landscape, snatching up EMF meters and infrared cameras as I went. All around me, the phantom soldiers began to stir once again, their movements growing more frenzied and erratic. As I ran, I felt a strange doubling of my vision. One moment, I was dodging musket fire and cannon blasts. The next, I was stumbling through overgrown weeds in the present day. The two realities seemed to be combining, fighting for dominance, and through it all, that sickly green light pulsed stronger and stronger. I reunited with the others at the edge of the vortex, our arms full of equipment. The abomination loomed before us, its countless eyes fixed upon our small group with malevolent intelligence. "Now what?" Hans shouted over the rising wind that whipped around us. "We've got to overload it," Greta called back, her earlier shock seemingly forgotten. "Turn everything on at once. Push it to the limit." As one, we activated each piece of equipment we had. The air filled with the shriek of feedback and the whine of overtaxed electronics. The abomination recoiled, its form rippling and distorting even more violently than before. But it wasn't enough. Even as we poured every ounce of energy we could into the makeshift weapon, I could see the creature beginning to push back. The vortex was widening, the boundaries between worlds growing thinner by the second. In desperation, I pulled out the Confederate belt buckle. "Klaus, you said this place was a nexus of timelines. What if we could use something from the past to stabilize the present?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he snatched the buckle from my hand and hurled it directly into the heart of the vortex. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, the swirling energies began to collapse. The abomination let out a shriek that threatened to shatter our eardrums, its form beginning to unravel. "It's working," Hans yelled triumphantly. "Keep pushing." We redoubled our efforts, forcing every last bit of power through our equipment. The vortex continued to shrink, dragging the writhing form of the abomination back into whatever hellish dimension it had emerged from. And then, with a final earth-shaking roar, it was gone. The vortex snapped shut, leaving behind nothing but a scorched patch of earth and the lingering scent of ozone. We stood there, panting and shell-shocked, as reality settled back into place around us. The phantom soldiers had vanished, leaving behind only the overgrown field and the dilapidated farmhouse that we had once encountered. Is it over?" Greta asked hesitantly, breaking the stunned silence that had fallen over us. Before any of us could answer, a low and ominous rumble began to emanate from beneath our feet. The ground trembled, and in the distance we could see storm clouds gathering with unnatural speed. "I don't think so," Klaus said grimly. "I fear we've only delayed the inevitable. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, still trying to break through." Hans nodded in agreement. "We need to warn someone, the authorities, other paranormal researchers, anyone who might be able to help prevent this from happening again." As we gathered our scattered equipment and made our way back to our vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The weight of unseen eyes seemed to press down on us, and whispers just beyond the edges of our hearing teased at our senses. We had survived our encounter with the unknown, but at what cost? What horrors still awaited us in the battles to come? As we drove away from that accursed place, I knew with grim certainty that our war against the darkness had just begun. The road ahead stretched out before us, leading into an uncertain and terrifying future, but we would face it together, armed with the knowledge we had gained and the unshakable bond forged in the crucible of cosmic horror, for we are ghost hunters, and our hunt continues. As our vehicle sped away from the haunted battlefield, an oppressive silence settled over all of us. Each lost in our own thoughts, we grappled with the cosmic horror that we had witnessed, and the chilling knowledge that our ordeal was far from over. The countryside blurred past the windows. The encroaching darkness seemed to swallow the last vestiges of daylight. It was Greta who finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't just leave. Whatever that was, that thing, it's still out there. We have a responsibility to stop it." Hans gripped the steering wheel even tighter, his knuckles white. "And how do you propose we do that, Greta? We barely escaped with our lives. We've no equipment to handle something of that magnitude." "No one is," Klaus interjected, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But Hans is right about one thing. We need to warn others. There are organizations, secret societies that deal with threats like this. I have connections from my time with the clergy." I turned to Klaus, surprised. In all our years of working together, he had never mentioned such connections. "What kind of organization?" I asked. "The kind that operates in the shadows, Wilhelm. The kind that guards humanity against threats most people couldn't even comprehend. I had hoped never to contact them again, but—" He trailed off, his expression grim. As if in response to Klaus's ominous words, a flash of green lightning split the sky, followed by a roll of thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. Hans swerved, nearly sending us off the road. "Mein Gott, it's following us," he said. I cranked my neck to look out the rear window. What I saw chilled me to my core. A wall of roiling storm clouds was rapidly gaining on us, shot through with pulses of that sickly green energy we had come to associate with the abomination. And within those clouds, I could have sworn I saw shapes forming and dissolving, grotesque, writhing forms that defied description. "Hans, I think you'd better drive faster." As Hans pressed down on the accelerator, Greta rummaged through her bag, pulling out a worn, leather-bound tome. "There might be something in here," she said, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. "It's an old family grimoire. I've never fully understood all of it, but there are protection spells, banishing rituals." "Now you tell us about this," Hans snapped, his usual skepticism forgotten in the face of our dire situation. "I didn't think we needed it," Greta shot back. "Most of our investigations have been, well, mundane compared to this. Restless spirits, local legends, nothing like—" She gestured helplessly at the encroaching storm behind us. As Greta continued to search her book, I noticed Klaus had closed his eyes, his lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. The words I caught didn't sound like any prayer I'd ever heard, though. They were in a language far older, far stranger. Suddenly, Klaus's eyes snapped open. "There," he said, pointing to a dirt road barely visible in the gathering gloom. "Turn there, Hans." "Are you insane? That leads back towards the woods. We need to go to town, to people." "Trust me," Klaus insisted, his voice carrying an authority I had never heard before. "That road will take us where we need to go." Perhaps it was the desperation of our situation, or perhaps some part of us recognized the ring of truth in Klaus's words. Whatever the reason, Hans wrenched the wheel, sending us bumping down the narrow dirt track. As we plunged deeper into the forest, the canopy above us grew thicker, blocking out what little light remained. The storm seemed to recede, but the oppressive feeling of being watched, of being hunted, only intensified. After what felt like hours, but could have only been minutes, we emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood a decrepit church, its spires listing dangerously to one side. "Stop here," Klaus commanded, already reaching for the door handle before Hans had fully put on the brakes. We piled out of the vehicle, the silence of the forest pressing in around us. No birds sang, no insects chirped. It was as if all of nature was holding its breath. "Klaus, what is this place?" He didn't answer immediately, instead striding purposefully towards the church's weathered doors. "A sanctuary, or perhaps our only hope." As we approached, I noticed some strange symbols carved into the wood of the door, sigils and runes that seemed to shift and change when viewed at different angles. Klaus placed his hand on the center of the door, murmuring words in that same ancient language he had used earlier. With a groan of protest, the wood and rusted metal swung open. The interior of the church was not what I had expected. Instead of pews and an altar, the vast space was filled with bookshelves, stretching from floor to ceiling. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that seemed to have no visible source. At the far end, where a crucifix might hang, there was an enormous stained glass window depicting a scene of cosmic chaos, swirling galaxies, eldritch entities, and at the center, a blazing eye that seemed to stare directly into my soul. "Welcome to the sanctum of the cosmic sigil," Klaus said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Greta gasped, her eyes wide with recognition. "I've heard whispers of this place, a repository of forbidden knowledge guarded by those who stand watch against the great old ones." Hans, for once, seemed at a loss for words. He wandered to the nearest bookshelf, running his fingers over the spine of an ancient tome. "This is impossible. I'm afraid it's all too real. And now, my friends, we have a choice to make. We can walk away from this and try to forget what we've seen, or we can take up the mantle of the vigil and stand against the darkness that threatens to consume our world." As if in answer, a tremor ran through the building. The stained-glass windows blazed with an inner light, and I could have sworn I saw the great eye blink. "I don't think walking away is an option anymore," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "Whatever's out there, whatever has awakened, it's not going to stop coming for us, or for anyone else." Greta nodded firmly. "Wilhelm's right. We have a duty to use what we've learned to fight back." We all turned to Hans, the eternal skeptic. He stood silent for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. "I suppose if we're going to face cosmic horrors, we might as well do it with the best resources available." Klaus smiled, but it was a grim expression. "Then let us begin. We have much to learn and precious little time." As Klaus led us deeper into the sanctum, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold from which there was no return. Our lives as simple ghost hunters were over. We were embarking on a new path, one fraught with danger beyond imagining. But as I looked at my companions, Hans the skeptic turned believer, Greta, her family's arcane knowledge finding new purpose, and Klaus, the man of faith who had kept earth-shattering secrets, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever horrors awaited us in the vast, uncaring cosmos, we would face them together. The ghost hunters had evolved. No longer mere hunters of ghosts, we were now guardians against forces that threatened the very fabric of reality. Our war against the darkness had truly begun, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. As we delved into the ancient texts and eldritch artifacts of the sanctum, preparing for battle, one thought echoed in my mind. The hunt continues, but the stakes have never been higher. As we immersed ourselves in the arcane knowledge of the sanctum, days blurred into weeks. The outside world seemed to fade away, our existence narrowing to the dusty tomes and eldritch artifacts that surrounded us. Each revelation brought new horrors, but also new understanding. Hans, once the voice of skepticism, now pored over quantum theory texts, alongside grimoires of forbidden magic, muttering about the thin line between science and sorcery. Greta's expertise in occult history found a new depth as she uncovered connections between ancient cults and cosmic entities that spanned millennia. Klaus guided us through the sanctum's secrets, his past as a former priest taking on new significance with each passing day. I found myself drawn to prophecies, cryptic verses and maddening visions that hinted at the greater conflict to come. It was in one such text, a crumbling papyrus written in a language that predated human civilization, that I found our first real lead. Listen to this. "When the stars align and the veils grow thin, the hunger that waits beneath the world shall reach forth. Its tendrils shall grasp at the threads of reality, and the tapestry of existence shall begin to unravel." Klaus looked up from the star chart he'd been studying, his face grave. "That sounds unsettlingly familiar to what we witnessed." Greta nodded, leafing through her own notes. "The alignment. There's a rare celestial event coming up, a convergence of planets that only happen once every 1,000 years. And let me guess, Hans interjected, his voice tinged with grim humor, it's happening soon. 3 days from now, Greta confirmed. A heavy sigh fell from all of us. The entity we had encountered, this hunger that waits beneath the worlds, had only been testing the boundaries of our reality. The true invasion was yet to come. We need to go back, I said, words tasting like ash in my mouth. Back to that battlefield. It's a weak point, a nexus where the barriers between worlds are already strained. Klaus nodded solemnly. Agreed, but we can't go in unprepared like last time. We need to gather allies, weapons, anything that might give us the edge. As if in response to his words, a section of bookshelf swung open, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, illuminated by an otherworldly glow, was an arsenal unlike anything I had ever seen. Ancient swords inscribed with runes of power, firearms that hummed with barely contained energy, amulets and talismans from a dozen different centuries, all radiating a palpable aura of protection. The Vigil has been preparing for this moment for centuries, Klaus explained as we stared in awe. We are not the first to stand against the darkness, nor will we be the last. But we may be the last line of defense for our world. As we began to arm ourselves, a thought occurred to me. What about the local authorities, the government? Surely they must have noticed something by now. Hans laughed bitterly. Oh, I'm sure they have, but what could they do against something like this? No, it's better they remain ignorant. Mass panic would only make our job harder. Over the next 2 days we prepared as best we could. Greta worked tirelessly on protection wards and banishing rituals. Hans modified our ghost hunting equipment, infusing it with eldritch energy we scarcely understood. Klaus reached out to his contacts in the Vigil, calling in every favor he could to gather what allies were available on such short notice. I delved deeper into the prophecies, searching for any clues, any weaknesses we could exploit against the cosmic horrors that threatened our world. As the hours and the alignment drew near, we made our way back to Virginia. The countryside seemed unchanged, peaceful enough, but we all felt the wrongness that permeated the air. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around the old battlefield, like space folding in on itself. We set up our equipment in a rough circle around the spot where the vortex had first appeared. Allies from the Vigil, a motley crew of scholars and warriors and mystics from around the globe, took up positions at key points, ready to lend their strength to whatever ritual we might need to perform. As the planets began to align, the air grew thick with tension. The sickly green light that we had come to dread began to pulse beneath the earth, growing stronger with each passing moment. "Whatever happens," I said to my companions, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me, "it has been an honor to stand with you." Greta squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with determination. Hans nodded grimly, his customary skepticism replaced by steely resolve. Klaus smiled, a look of peace settling over his features. "We stand now at the threshold, guardians against the darkness, sentinels against the void. Whatever horror may come, we face it together for the sake of all we hold dear." As if in response to his words, the ground began to split open. The vortex of green energy erupted skyward, tearing a hole in the very fabric of reality. Through that hole, we caught our first glimpse of the hunger that waits between worlds. It was vast beyond comprehension, a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes and mouths that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. As it began to push into our world, I felt my sanity straining at the seams. But we had come prepared this time. As one, we raised our weapons, channeling our energies, and began the ritual that would determine the fate of the world. The battle for reality itself had begun, and we, the ghost hunters, stood as humanity's last desperate hope. The cosmic entity surged forward, its countless appendages lashing in all directions, the air filled with an otherworldly shriek that threatened to shatter our eardrums and break our minds. But we held firm, our protective wards flaring to life as they absorbed the brunt of the assault. Greta's voice rose above the chaos, chanting words of power that seemed to make the air vibrate. Hans directed bursts of modified electromagnetic energy at the creature, causing sections of its vast form to ripple and distort. Klaus stood at the center of our formation, his arms raised, channeling the combined might of the vigil through ancient artifacts that we had brought from the sanctum. And me, I found myself locked in a mental battle with the entity itself. As our allies fought to contain its physical form, I grappled with its alien consciousness, trying to find some weakness, some way to drive it back. Images flashed through my mind, entire worlds consumed, civilizations rising and falling in the blink of an eye, the cold, uncaring vastness of a universe far longer and more terrifying than we had ever imagined. But among the cosmic horrors, I caught a glimpse of something, a pattern, a rhythm, an underlying structure of reality itself. A resonance, I shouted. We need to match its frequency. Understanding dawned on Hans's face. He quickly adjusted our equipment, turning it to the cosmic frequency I had glimpsed in my mental struggle. The air around us began to hum, a counterpart to the maddening shrieks of the entity. As our energies aligned, I felt a surge of power unlike anything I had ever experienced. For a brief, eternal moment, we were connected, not just to each other, but to the very fabric of the universe. Through that connection, we pushed back against the hunger that waits between worlds. The entity recoiled, its vast form beginning to collapse in on itself. The vortex of energy that had torn open reality started to shrink, drawing the cosmic horror back into whatever nightmare realm it had emerged from. Our victory, though, was not without cost. As the last of the entity was pulled back through the closing portal, I saw Klaus crumble, blood trickling from his nose and ears, the strain of channeling so much power taking its toll. "Klaus!" Greta cried out, rushing to support him. He smiled weakly, his eyes unfocused. "It's done. The barrier is sealed, but not forever. It will try again." As Klaus slumped into Greta's arms, the last of the otherworldly energy dissipated. The battlefield fell silent, the only sound our ragged breathing and the faint moans of the wounded. We had won, for now. The immediate threat was contained, but as I looked at my exhausted companions, at the allies who had fought beside us, I knew that our war was far from over. The hunger that waits between worlds had been driven back, but not destroyed. And there were other threats out there, other cosmic horrors waiting for their chance to break through reality. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made a silent vow. We would recover, we would learn, and we would grow stronger, for we were no longer simple ghost hunters, tracking down local legends and restless spirits. We had become something more, guardians of reality, sentinels against the darkness that lurked between the stars. And our hunt, our endless vigil would continue, for the sake of our worlds and all worlds that might exist beyond our understanding. We would stand ready, always watching, always fighting, always hunting the horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of our fragile reality. The sun rose on a world that had no idea how close it had come to annihilation, and in the growing light we began to plan our next move in a war that might never truly end. In the days that followed our confrontation, the true cost of our victory became painfully clear. Klaus, weakened by the immense energy of the channeling, slipped away peacefully in his sleep. His sacrifice had sealed the breach, but at the ultimate price. We weren't the only ones to suffer losses. Many of our allies from the Vigil fell in battle, their names to be honored in the secret annals of our organization. Greta, overcome with grief at the horrors that she had witnessed, chose to sequester herself in a remote monastery, seeking solace in ancient texts and meditation. Hans, ever the scientist, threw himself into studying the artifacts and knowledge that we had gathered, but the strain proved too much for such a rational mind. I received word that he had been institutionalized, his brilliant intellect shattered by truths that no human was meant to comprehend. As for me, I couldn't simply walk away. The things I had seen, the knowledge I now possessed, they were burdens, but also a responsibility. I took up Klaus's mantle, working to rebuild the Vigil, to prepare for future incursions. Years passed. The world spun on, blissfully unaware of the sacrifice made to keep it safe. I grew older, wearier, but never let my guard down, for I knew the truth. Our victories had been temporary. The cosmic horrors were patient, eternal. They could afford to wait. On the 10th anniversary of our battle, I returned to that Virginia field. The scars of our conflict had long since faded, nature reclaiming the land. As I stood there, remembering fallen friends and the weight of secrets, I felt a familiar tremor in the air. A faint green glow began to emanate from the ground, pulsing like a distant heartbeat. The hunger that waits beneath the worlds had not forgotten us. It was testing the barrier once again, probing for weakness. I sighed, feeling the weight of years and knowledge pressing down upon me. This was to be my life now, an eternal vigilance against threats beyond imagination. As I reached for my phone to alert the Vigil, I allowed myself a grim smile. The hunt, it seemed, would never truly end, but as long as I drew breath, as long as there were those willing to stand against the darkness, humanity would have a fighting chance. Perhaps, in the great cosmic scheme of things, that was victory enough. With one last look at the peaceful fields that belied its true nature, I turned and walked away. There was work to be done, preparation to be made, for the next battle in our secret endless war loomed on the horizon, and I would be ready. And just like that, our stories are once again at an end. I'll see you all very soon for more cozy horror, though. And until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.